All right, hello everybody. Our next topic is Immanuel Kant. Kant is a very famous philosopher. Just to let you know that up front, I mean, most philosophers, if you ask them who the most famous philosophers are, they would say, you know, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then Kant. He's way up on the list. And it's not only because of his metaphysics and epistemology, but also his ethics. He's very famous for that as well. So, very seminal philosopher in history. We're talking about, 1724 to 1804 is when he lived. So, late 1700s. Okay, but let's get to his metaphysics. That's our quest in this class, and his epistemology. And we're reading the Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, which is a abbreviated version of a much larger work called the Critique of Pure Reason. I think the Prolegomena is a little more accessible to novices, people that haven't read a lot of philosophy. So not that Kant's accessible at all. One thing I need to put out there right up front is Kant is really hard to read. Like notoriously hard to read and understand. It's not you. Kant is very tough to read and understand. For one thing, you got to learn how to speak Kantian, because he makes up a whole bunch of words that are just his words that he's just making up and using, because I guess he feels like the regular language does not have any words to express what he wants to express, so he just makes up his own terms. And we'll see a bunch of those shortly. And actually, Kant's not that difficult if you start to learn how to speak Kantian. I'm finally fairly fluent in Kantian. When I read it, it's like, okay, I understand what it took a long time, though. It was not an easy task to achieve that. All right, so let's talk about it. Okay, so Kant's first question in the Prolegomena is metaphysics even possible? And the reason he's asking this question is because he read Hume, okay? I'm not even sure Hume would be as famous as he is if it wasn't for the fact that Kant refers to him and really took him seriously. As he said, Hume awoke me from my dogmatic slumber. And if you look at the last paragraph of Hume's work, The Inquiry, which we just went over, look at that last paragraph, the very last paragraph in the book. Hume is basically saying metaphysics doesn't exist, and Kant just picks up right from there. And he's willing to allow what Hume says. That is, if metaphysics does exist, it's not empirical and it's not math. Like I said, read the paragraph, you'll see that's what Hume says. So it's about pure understanding and pure reasoning. The word pure is one of these made up words, okay? What does he mean by pure? Well, I think the only way to really kind of wrap your head around that is to note that it's opposed to empirical. In other words, experience. Doesn't have anything to do with experience. It's not empirical. And it's not implied. So it kind of has this connotation of being theoretical as opposed to applied. Applied reasoning would be his other work, which is practical reasoning, which has to do with ethics. So pure is not applied. Of course, ethics is meant to be applied. All right. Now, more terminology to try to get us off the ground here and understanding what Kant has to say. I want to start with the distinction between synthetic and analytic judgments. Okay, now this is similar to Hume's relations of ideas versus matters of fact. It's similar, but it's not the same. In important ways, it's not the same. One clear similarity is that analytic judgments are by necessity or contradiction. That's the same as relations of ideas. Another thing is that they're always a priori. And I mentioned a priori before. This is not his own technical term. This is a common term in philosophy, which basically means without experience. In other words, something that does not need to be investigated or confirmed by experience. I say, literally it means before experience, but I don't want to confuse it with innate ideas because it's not the same. That's not the same thing. It means without experience. Now, synthetic judgments is a different story. The way that Kant explains synthetic judgments is that synthetic judgments extend our knowledge. They grow our knowledge. They add to our knowledge. You can put it various ways here. And thus, all a posteriori judgments, that's after experience, are synthetic because no matter what happens, I mean, it may not grow your knowledge much, but every time you experience anything, you've learned something. So all times you experience anything will result in synthetic judgments. Okay, so let me try to maybe explain this a little bit more. All right, here's one way I'd like to explain analytic judgments, okay? Say you have a whole bunch of data, and you take all this data and you put it into a computer program, and it spits out a bunch of graphs and diagrams and such. Did the computer learn anything? No, it did not learn anything. Okay, the computer didn't learn anything from that data. You had all the data. Is it useful? Yes, it's useful. Think about it. That's analytic. It's not a worthless thing. It sounds like it might be worthless because it's not growing our knowledge at all. It's not adding anything, but it can, sorting the knowledge out and in a way that we can draw conclusions is important. So Kant calls it the scaffolding of our thoughts. It's not pointless. But anytime we grow our knowledge and add to our knowledge, that's synthetic. And that's sort of the more key thing in Kant's argument. It's the synthetic judgments. Notice, these are technical terms. Synthetic doesn't have anything to do with the normal word synthetic. He's making these words up. Okay, now, given this, we have notice that analytic judgments are always a priori, and synthetic judgments, all a posteriori judgments are synthetic. What about this possibility? Is it possible that we could have a synthetic judgment that adds to our knowledge that is also a priori without experience? Notice that's not ruled out in this way he's configuring these things. That's very important because that's how he argues for metaphysics. Because back to the question, is metaphysics possible? Again, just echoing Hume, it can't be anything empirical, which would be a priori, by the way, and it can't be mathematics. But are synthetic a priori judgments possible, something that grows our knowledge without experience? And Kant's first answer to this question is yes, okay? And his yes answer has to do with the fact that he thinks that math and geometry are indeed both synthetic and a priori. So he thinks that 12 times 12 is 144, I think that's the example in the text, yields new knowledge. If you take the concept of 12 and the concept of 12 and the concept of times, it does not tell you that it's not automatic that it's 144. That learning that it is that answer is extending our knowledge and growing our knowledge. So math is synthetic because it's growing our knowledge, and it's math is obviously a priori. Okay. Maybe a little bit more discussion about what a priori means. A priori means you don't have to go test or check anything. Okay. Math certainly fits the bill here because 10 times 10 is 100. Okay. Well, do we have to do an experiment to find out whether 10 times 10 is 100? Let's say we do. Hey, let's just do it. So I'm going to take 10 sets of 10 objects, I don't know, milk cans or something, or milk cartons or something. I'm going to line them all up. I'm going to count them out, and I'm going to find out whether 10 times 10 is 100. So I do this, and I get 99. Do it again, because you know, you screwed up. 10 times 10 is 100. It doesn't matter what the experiment says, what the results are there. It's not based on experience. That's what a priori means. 10 times 10 is 100. If you don't get 100 when you add up 10 times 10, you messed up because it's a priori, as opposed to as opposed to regular science where it is empirical and you have to do an experiment to confirm a hypothesis. That's a posteriori. That's totally legitimate. Sorry, I just noticed a typo here. It's a posteriori, not just posteriori. Oops. All right. And look, and by the way, it's not just math. I also should point that out. The way Kant describes a priori is that the predicate is contained in the subject, and his real classic example, I used this last time, is all bachelors are male. Well, a bachelor is an unmarried male. The way Kant would describe that is that the description unmarried male is contained in the very idea of bachelor. Could be other things too. I mean, it's Tuesday or it's not Tuesday. That's actually a priori as well. What if you fall unconscious for weeks? and after weeks you come out, you wake up after a few weeks of being unconscious. And you say to yourself, I bet it's Tuesday or it's not Tuesday. Guess what? You're right. Because it doesn't matter what day it is. It's either Tuesday or it's not Tuesday. You don't have to look at a calendar. You don't have to check. That's a priori. Okay, but anything you have to check and look up and verify is a posteriori. Like I mentioned, how many cars are Toyotas in the parking lot? That was my example I gave last time. But anything that you have to actually verify by checking and looking it up, that's a posteriori. And every time you do that, you're going to learn something new, so it's synthetic. Anyway, back to the argument at hand here. Math there's no question math is a priori because it's not verified by experience. Kant is claiming that it's synthetic. I will just quickly throw out, that is a questionable claim. That's something that a lot of people have challenged, and maybe rightfully so. Perhaps I'll come back and talk about that later. All right, so math and geometry are synthetic and a priori. This is not really proving anything about metaphysics, because one of the first things he stipulated, and it's not math. Metaphysics is not math. So why is he even talking about this? Well, the reason he's talking about this is kind of laying a foundation or groundwork for how he's going to answer the question later. So this is more of a step in the process towards answering the question, not the real answer to the question. I mean, he's just setting forth some ideas here that he's going to actually take to a much a different level. Okay, so this is a step in the argument. It's not the end of the argument. Be clear about that. He has not proven that metaphysics is possible. All right, so in terms of that, how does he explain why is math and geometry, why are they synthetic and a priori? This is how he's starting to move in that direction of answering the question about metaphysics. Well, the first thing he discusses is this notion of empirical intuition versus pure intuition. Okay, now for Kant, empirical, these are technical terms again, made up words on his own. The word intuition has nothing to do with the English word intuition. This is made up, okay? Empirical intuition, this is like a mental picture, okay? So when you look around your room and you see it, and all the other senses, it's empirical, so it's experience, so what you hear and smell, all that, you form this picture in your mind, right? That's your empirical intuition of the room. You're picturing the room in your head. All right, that's your empirical intuition of the room. Now, Kant thinks that the key to understanding math and geometry lies in the pure intuitions, or pure intuition, and that is that picture in your head of the room without the empirical part. So this is a clever argument. Kant has a bunch of very clever arguments. So take the picture that you have of the room in your mind and subtract all the empirical things out of it. So you have this picture of the room in your head, take away the way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it smells, the way it tastes, all that, take everything that you're getting from your senses out of that picture. What's left? I would say nothing. I mean, that would be that's where I would go with this. But Kant says, no, actually there is something left after you take all that out, and that is space and time. Because there's a place where it's happening and a time when it's happening. That's like the backdrop. That is the pure intuitions. As I mentioned, pure is like opposed to empirical. Well, take the empirical part out. What's pure? It's the space and the time, when it's happening and where it's happening. That, Kant believes, those are the pure intuitions. And they explain math and geometry in this way. Again, another pretty clever argument. Space is the subject matter of geometry, he claims, which, sounds pretty reasonable. That's what geometry measures, spaces, shapes, right? So geometry is measuring spaces, and so the subject matter of geometry is space. Time is the subject matter of math. This is a little more weird, but also pretty clever. When you count, okay, first of all, what's the basic units of math? The numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you count, what are you counting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could be counting your fingers, I guess, but at the most minimal, basic point of view here, you're counting time. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're counting moments of time. And this is how Kant claims that time is the subject matter of mathematics. All right. So this is going to lead us to Kant's expanding this whole notion into a whole different kind of metaphysical picture of how to understand the world. I'm going to read this, and I don't expect you to understand it. The next video I make is I'm going to attempt to explain it, but he says, so I'm going to read the Kantian, so where I'm at in the text and such. Math contains synthetic a priori judgments. Where do these come from? The answer is they are exhibited a priori in pure intuition, or as he says, mental representation. This is not empirical intuition or sense perception, but pure intuition apart from and prior to objects. Pure intuition makes the representation of objects possible in empirical intuition. Our intuition does not represent things in themselves, but only how things appear to us. This is not actually Kant, but we have a veil of representation. That's the way others describe this. A priori intuition or pure intuition is the form of our sensibility, and it lends form to our representation of objects. Since we know objects only as they appear, we can understand the requirements for their appearing to us. The requirements, note that. These requirements include space and time, which are the pure intuitions. Clearly, all experience needs these. Hence, they are the a priori form of appearances. All right, this is going to take quite a bit of explanation to sort out what he means by things in themselves, requirements for experience, and so I'm going to post that in the next video. But this is where we're at this point. See you for that one.